Before we begin, we want to quickly review some housekeeping items. First, this session will be recorded and will be available after the event. Second, if you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A box located within your console. We'll have time at the end of the webinar to answer many, if not all, of the questions. And we encourage you to reach out to us via the Steps Forward inbox, which is stepsforward@ama-assn.org for all questions that we're unable to address. Now, the disclaimer, our AMA Steps Forward content is provided for informational purposes only, and it's believed to be current and accurate at the time of its posting, but it's not intended to be and should not be construed to be legal, financial, medical, or consulting advice. So we're going to start today's webinar with my introduction of Dr. Kevin Hopkins. Now, Kevin has been a staff physician at the Department of Family Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic since 2005 and holds an academic appointment with the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine as a clinical assistant professor, teaches within the Cleveland Clinic Family Medicine residency program, and he's also a faculty instructor for the Cleveland Clinic Global Leadership and Learning Institute. Dr. Hopkins serves as the primary care medical director for Cleveland Clinic Community Care, which is its population health institute. Now, over the past several years, he's been a recognized leader and a national speaker in the field of caregiver burnout and ambulatory practice redesign and transformation. He's led his primary care group to transition to a model of value-based care, and he continues to leverage an advanced team-based care practice model as a vehicle to achieve the goals of population management. He's previously served as a physician advisor for Google Health, and I've been delighted to work with him because he's a senior physician advisor within the Practice Transformation Initiative for the American Medical Association. Now today, Dr. Hopkins will be presenting Setting Boundaries for Preventing Fatigue and Building Resilience. Kevin, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And so I'm going to pass our virtual microphone over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Presuming everyone can hear me okay. If not, somebody stop me. But glad to be available and with you all today and spending some time talking about caregiver burnout and what can be done about it, as well as what can be done to help prevent it. So these are our learning objectives for today, what I intend to cover. We'll talk about the value and necessity of limit setting for personal well-being. We'll identify and practice using some strategies for developing, implementing, and maintaining healthy personal boundaries. I'd like to invite you to consider some examples of personal boundaries. And then I'd like to invite you and encourage you to create a personalized list of potential personal boundaries to evaluate, prioritize, and then I'll ask you at the end of our time together today to commit to choose one to try, to implement. And so hopefully these learning objectives will become clear as we go throughout our time together today. I often show this picture at the beginning of most of my presentations. It represents a cliche that tends to be overused in business and other applications, that of the burning platform. But a few years ago, I thought about that analogy or that cliche of the burning platform, and I wondered where it came from. And what I came across was a book that was written in 1992 by a man named Daryl Conner. It was called Managing at the Speed of Change. And in that book, he talks about an event that happened on a July evening in 1988. It took place off the coast of Scotland in the North Sea, and it was a disastrous explosion and fire that occurred on the Piper Alpha oil drilling platform. In that event, that night, 166 crew members and 2 rescuers lost their lives in what was and still is the worst catastrophe in the 50-plus year history of North Sea oil exploration. One of the 63 crew members who survived, his name was Andy Moken, and he was a superintendent on the rig. He remembers being awakened by the explosion. He had been sleeping below deck. And in a confused state, he wandered up to the deck and saw flames twisted metal all around, walked to the edge of the platform, looked down to the surface of the water, and saw debris littering the surface of the water, engulfed in flames. He knew that the water was cold, and because of the water temperature, he knew that he could live only about 20 minutes if he were to jump, if he weren't rescued. Despite all that, Andy jumped 15 stories from the platform into the cold water. When reporters asked him why he took that potentially fatal leap, he didn't hesitate in his answer. He said it was either jump or fry. He chose possible death over certain death. Andy jumped because he felt that he had no choice. The price of staying on the platform was too high. That's a literal burning platform. When I think about how that applies to our time together today, the rate of burnout is particularly high among healthcare workers of all types. I'll spend some time focusing on physicians specifically, but much of what I'm going to say, if not most of it, is applicable to anyone who works in healthcare. Burnout's an epidemic which preceded the pandemic, and things certainly haven't gotten easier as a result. So, what's burnout? The AMA definition of burnout is that it's a stress reaction marked by depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, a feeling of decreased personal achievement, and a lack of empathy for our patients. Burnout is largely perpetuated by circumstances. Organizational culture and work environmental factors are significant contributors to healthcare worker burnout. Prevention and mitigation factors largely depend on systems prioritizing and embracing caregiver wellness. If you work in a mid-sized to larger healthcare organization, you know that it takes a long time to turn a big boat. So if you've ever experienced fatigue, exhaustion, or burnout, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It usually means there's something wrong with the system or the environment in which you work. In fact, you're in the majority of colleagues and peers because most of us have struggled with burnout at some point in time during our life and career. I mentioned it takes a long time to change the course of a large boat. Organizational cultural changes take a long time. What can we do as individuals to equip ourselves to not just survive in our current work environment, but even to thrive? How can we prepare for the next time that ship runs aground? So we can't just wait for system change and culture change to get us out of the situation we're in. I think we have an opportunity to better equip and prepare ourselves to survive in the environment in which we work every day. I use the analogy of a ship running aground. It'll happen again. This is a photo of a container ship running aground off the coast of Maryland, almost exactly a year after one from the same shipping company got stuck in the Suez Canal. The same things tend to happen over and over again. We make the same mistakes. Circumstances, though we may want them to change, don't always change at the pace at which we would like. And so how can we equip ourselves to better handle the next crisis? In order to get some familiarity and shared starting point, I want to talk a little bit about fatigue and exhaustion as it relates to burnout. And so I want to define several different vocabulary terms. And so I'm going to break this up into vocabulary and math. These are topics that relate to my kids very well. At any given evening, we're studying for some sort of test. I've got a freshman in high school, an 8th grader, and a 5th grader. And so there's some sort of academic work going on. They all like reading and language arts and vocabulary, not so much the math, but we're going to do both today. So we're going to talk about and define fatigue, margin, resilience, stress injury, recovery, exhaustion, and burnout. And that'll be the context in which we'll start to think about personal boundaries. Fatigue, it's tiredness. It's being worn from physical or mental exertion. It's that tiredness to the bone that you feel. It's being completely worn out. Margin is a concept that I'll spend a little bit more time talking about. Margin is the measure or degree of difference between capacity and content. We all know the word margin from various contexts. It could be in a document using Microsoft Word where we have to set the margins and think about how close to the edge of the page we want to be. It could be margin based on any gauge or meter that we may check on a regular basis as far as what the capacity is and what the current rate is. There's a book that I enjoyed particularly called Margin, and it's written by a physician, Dr. Richard Swenson, in 2004. And he talks a great deal about margin and what it is for the individual, and specifically for the individual that works in healthcare. Some of what I'm about to share is related to Dr. Swenson's work. Margin can be described in lots of different ways. I just named a couple of ways, but it's the space between our load and our limit. It's the amount that's allowed beyond which is needed. It's the amount held in reserve for contingencies and unexpected situations. If you're doing a construction project, you're going to have some money in the budget for contingency planning. In a business sense, it's the difference between revenue and expenses or your profit. Margin on a personal, individual level is the opposite of overload. Having margin for an individual is the gap between rest and exhaustion. It's the space between breathing and suffocation. To contextualize that even further, these are some examples from Dr. Swenson's book. Being marginless is fatigue. Having margin is energy. Marginless is red ink. Margin is black ink. Marginless is being in a hurry all the time. Having margin is being calm. Being marginless is anxiety. Having margin is security. Marginless is culture. Having margin is counterculture. It's different than how the world lives. Marginless is only making it part way up the stairs. Margin is having breath left at the top. Marginless is an overflowing plate. Having margin is having space left for dessert. Having margin is treading water with your nose dry. Being marginless is trying to do that while being handed a cinder block. We'll come back to margin in a little bit, but next I want to talk about resilience. Resilience, what it means is being able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. It's the ability to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed. The picture that I have in my mind when I think about resilience is a rubber band. So the picture of the rubber band on the left, it has its elasticity, it hasn't been overstretched. The one in the middle has been stretched a few times a little too far, and it's starting to lose its shape and elasticity. The one on the right has been stretched way too far, or it's been stretched way too long and has become brittle and has snapped or broken. When we think about resilience as being the ability to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed, how many of us don't feel bent, stretched, or compressed, particularly over the last 2 years? I would guess that most of us feel like we've been bent, stretched, or compressed. And so how can we build our resilience so that we're better able to spring back and recoil after having external tensions and pressures placed upon us? Stress injury. Stress injury is mental, emotional, or a spiritual insult, which may also cause physical symptoms, and usually does. Stress injury can be from a number of different sources. Some of them are on the screen here: life threat, loss, inner conflict, and then there's wear and tear, which is really just sort of the work is a grind. For all of us that work in healthcare, we can experience any of these stress injuries, or maybe all of them, throughout the course of a typical day. When you layer on top of that the COVID-19 pandemic, it's sort of like getting up for the big game that never ends. And so we've been stretched, compressed, and strained for a period of time that is not sustainable. And it wasn't that things were all that sustainable before. It's just now worse. What's recovery? Recovery is the effect of margin and resilience. It's the ability to return to normal baseline state and function after an injury or an insult. Resilience allows for recovery. If we don't have resilience and we have another insult or injury, it leads to exhaustion. Exhaustion takes that fatigue another step further. It's extreme physical or mental fatigue. It's the sense of being completely used up. There's nothing left in the tank. You're emptied out. Empty doesn't have degrees. You're either empty or you're not. When you're exhausted, you're emptied out. You've given everything you have to give, and there's literally nothing left. If we don't take care of ourselves, that leads to burnout, a stress reaction marked by depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and a feeling of decreased personal achievement and a lack of empathy for our patients, a place that none of us wants to be. So that's the vocabulary segment of our discussion. And moving on to the next slide, we'll consider sort of what the math of fatigue and resilience looks like. And I think the analogy of math will make more sense when you see it. But it's going to put these terms together in ways that I think are going to be easy to understand what the result is. So here's what I think of about the math of fatigue and resilience. Life happens, right? Stress injury is going to happen. There's no way to completely avoid it. But how can we limit its impact? If we have margin, if we have space left in our lives and are able to absorb the hit, we can recover, and we can recover relatively easily and quickly and move on. If we don't have that margin, life plus stress injury minus margin, it leads to fatigue. And if we don't recover from our fatigue based on our resilience, then we hit another stress injury, that leads to exhaustion. We get to the point of exhaustion, again, we can recover with resilience. But if we're not resilient and we have another stress injury, that tends to lead to burnout. So here's those same words in a graphic representation. The y-axis is functionality, the x-axis is time, life, stress hits us, margin, we recover and move along. If we don't have that margin, we become fatigued. Resilience helps allow us to get back to a normal baseline functionality and we recover. If we don't have that resilience, another life stressor comes, maybe in just a few minutes, and we become exhausted. Again, resilience can get us back to recovery, but it takes longer and it's a lot more effort to get back to our baseline functionality. If in the meantime, we're inadequately predisposed or equipped to handle that exhaustion with resilience and another stress injury occurs, that's when we're at most high risk for burnout. I like this quote from Chris Sinsky, who's our VP of Professional Satisfaction, my friend and colleague at the AMA. She says, we feel caught between doing the work our patients need and the work we feel is mandatory in our environment. When those competing demands are not aligned, it creates a situation that's simply unmanageable for many physicians and other health professionals. When we have repeated stress and strain, and I'll go back to the prior slide here. When we have this occurring on a recurring basis in our life, it's like a repetitive stress injury or overuse injury in a musculoskeletal sense, probably something we can all relate to. Injury with adequate training, stretching, strengthening, aftercare leads to quick recovery. Inadequacies of training, stretching, strength, and aftercare, and maybe being of an older age variety, tend to lead to muscle fatigue. Recovery takes longer and is harder. Repetitive injury without adequate recovery can lead to a tear in the affected muscle, tendon, or ligament. And now we've got even bigger problems. So how do we think about that cycle and the need or desire for professional satisfaction when we have competing priorities in terms of our everyday life? What does that look like? How can we better prepare ourselves to prevent the factors that lead to burnout and mitigate burnout once it's begun? First is to consider the causes of burnout among healthcare workers. And I had this slide as providers, but I crossed that out and made it into workers because as I alluded to earlier, it's not just physicians who are facing burnout, fatigue, and exhaustion. It's just about everybody in healthcare right now. You can see it on the faces and in the eyes of everybody. So there's lots of factors involved in that. There's many causes of burnout. This is just scratching the surface, but work overload, loss of autonomy, insufficient reward, recognition, or appreciation. We're all working under various time pressures. Nothing is ever to be done at your leisure. There's community breakdown. Think of how being physically separated over the last 2 years in many instances has affected relationships among not just people that we're friends with or family members, but people that we work with and our patients. Oftentimes there's the perceived absence of fairness and conflicting values or priorities in our work. That affects us. Also diminished prestige. When the pandemic first started, everybody that worked in healthcare was a hero. Then as everything sort of has gone on and there's been lots of news and media attention around vaccination and testing for COVID and all of those things, the medical establishment in many people's eyes has sort of become an enemy. And so that view in the public court of opinion, I think, has shifted. We also have a very complex work environment for most of us, with sometimes complicated equipment, supplies that are not always available at our fingertips, and we've got to spend time looking for things or finding things that may not work when we get them in our hands. Layer on top of that the ongoing pandemic, which has been, as I mentioned, highly politicized, polarizing, and which has repeatedly overwhelmed the healthcare industry for over the last 2 years. And it's not hard to see why people are thinking about their future in a different way, maybe even thinking about different jobs or different careers, and I'll touch on that in a moment too. The manifestations of burnout are several, but you can sort of distill it down into 3 basic buckets. One is exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. It measures feelings of being emotionally overextended, exhausted by our work, our reserves are spent. It also causes depersonalization or cynicism. And this is that measure of unfeeling and impersonal response towards the recipients of our services, mainly our patients and also our colleagues. That carries with it a high risk for leaving the profession and increased rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Burnout also causes reduced effectiveness, and that might be real or perceived, but it's the impression that our personal accomplishment and impact, the feeling that what we do really makes no difference at all. And that can be a miserable way to go through life. Specifically, how does it affect physicians? And I would argue this is largely anybody else that works in healthcare. But it affects our interpersonal relationships. People who are burned out, especially physicians, have higher rates of divorce and infidelity. We have less meaningful relationships with peers, friends, and family members. There's higher rates of early retirement or decreases in work commitments, such as lowering our FTE because we just can't do it anymore. It represents an increased risk of self-harming behavior, such as getting inadequate rest, alcoholism, prescription drug abuse, and even suicide. It's estimated that nearly every day a physician in the United States commits suicide, a rate that is more than double that of the general population. It also has significant impacts, burnout does, on healthcare organizations. On patients, on patient care. We provide less optimal patient outcomes. There's an increased risk of adverse events and complications of chronic diseases and procedures. 54% of burned out residents report suboptimal patient care outcomes. It leads to lower patient satisfaction. Patients sense our distraction and our discontentment and respond accordingly. It also leads to an increased risk of medical errors. The odds of a patient being affected by serious safety event are more than doubled if they're treated by a physician with symptoms of burnout. The effects on our organizations can be more than we might anticipate. Burnout causes lower productivity, no matter how it's measured. It causes workforce to be less efficient and caregivers to be less engaged. It increases the risk of turnover. It affects access as well as financials. The average cost to recruit and hire a physician to replace one lost to attrition due to burnout is between $500,000 and $1 million, based on specialty. In a large organization like mine, of over 4,000 physicians, the expected number of physician resignations due to burnout in a typical year is about 100, or 2.3%. That cost is $50 to $100 million a year, or 14% of our annual budget, not to mention the medical legal risks associated with it. So the cost of burnout from all angles is too significant for us to ignore. When you think about what that means for our workforce as a result of the current state prior to COVID pandemic, and then what's happening now, think of it in terms of this, the Great Resignation, as it's been called. Since January 2021, 43 million U.S. workers have quit their job. November 2021 was the single highest month on record. 4.5 million workers quit their job. During the pandemic, 40% of all U.S. working parents either voluntarily reduced their hours or quit their jobs in order to take care of their kids. Of those who quit, more than a third do not plan to rejoin the workforce. When you think about some of the areas in which we're struggling with adequate staffing, nursing, medical assistants, professions that tend to be largely made up of women in the workforce, women's participation in the labor force is the lowest it's been in 30 years. Job openings exceed people who are unemployed. It's the largest gap on record. Those who are seeking employment are at a 20-year low. And significant to us, healthcare has the fewest job seekers of any industry. People are quitting their jobs at a record pace and seeking better opportunities with higher wages and more flexible work arrangements. When you think about that, for healthcare, it's sort of become the perfect storm. We have difficulty retaining the folks that we have, and we have great struggles trying to recruit and hire new caregivers. What happens? Who gets caught in the middle? So, with all those things in mind, I've probably created a sense of further dread, anxiety, and depression among us. We're going to talk about what can you do as an individual, because you can't fix all of this stuff, right? These are system issues, these are cultural issues, and so we're not going to fix all of that as individuals. It's going to take time, but what can we do? One is to think about better preparing ourselves to prevent and mitigate burnout risk. And one way to do that is to think about boundary setting. So we're going to turn to some, what I hope will be some very practical tools, tactics, and strategies to help you consider and create margin and build personal resilience. I don't claim to be an expert on this myself. I've not been good at it historically. I'm getting better, and I'll share with you some of the things that I struggle with specifically, personally. And I hope you'll consider some specific personal struggles of your own. When I think about this, I think about the opportunity that we have to step away from the line, to take a step back. If you think about that, healthier boundaries lead to healthier margin. Having more margin leads to better resilience, which helps us to recover more quickly when injuries occur. So I'd like to structure the thought around boundary setting in this way, sort of an outline for how to do it. As we go through this today, I'd encourage you, if you don't have it yet, I want you to get a pen and a piece of paper or open a new document on your computer screen as we go along, because I want this to be very practical and useful. I want you to come away from our time together with some very practical next steps of what you can do to try to help yourself and help others to build margin and resilience. So as we talk about some of these things, I want you to start making a list. Create a personalized list of potential personal boundaries, and then I'll challenge you to evaluate and prioritize them and choose one to try. So as we talk about, or you come up with ideas about specific things you could do that would make a difference to build margin and resilience in your life, start making a list. And I hope you'll come up with many. When you think about going through this exercise, the first step is to identify, to make a list of those actions which, if you implemented, have the potential to create more margin and build resilience in your life. Those choices are going to be the same as far as they favorably impact margin and resilience. The second step is to prioritize. Prioritize that list. rank order your most, maybe you think about it in terms of what would be the most impactful change to least impactful. Maybe you think of it in terms of what would be easiest to implement to most challenging. You could use a four-quadrant construct, whatever way you want to do to help prioritize the list that you'll be creating. And prioritize those which are going to be high impact potential. The third step is to commit, to pick one, pick two, pick three, right? It doesn't need to be a lot, but you need to start. Pick something to start with and commit to it. The third step is to honor it. Honor that commitment. Honor those priorities. Respect them. Honor them as a commitment that you've made to yourself, to your family, to coworkers, to your patients. Be firm with those boundaries, not necessarily rigid, but firm. There is a difference. And so this is something that I've struggled with, is being firm enough. I tend to set boundaries and then I break them right away. And I always justify it in my mind because I'm doing it for the good of someone else. But at a certain point, we need to think about the good of ourselves. And so that's why this picture is on here. I had the opportunity to fly to Southern California last week. My son and his first college visit, which was an emotional experience more for my wife than for me. But every time I get on a plane, I think about this. You know, they go through the safety briefing that hardly anybody listens to. And one of the last things they say is they talk about if oxygen becomes necessary, oxygen masks will drop from the panel above your seat. And what do they always say about that? They say, if you're traveling with people who need assistance, be sure to what? Put your own mask on before helping others. And yet, so many of us have that fixer mentality, that hero mentality that I'm not going to put my own mask on. That takes too much time. I'm going to try to help everybody else. But then you end up being no good to anybody else. And when your family and those you love and those you care about most, when what's left of you gets around to be gotten by them, what's left to be gotten isn't worth getting after all. It's a quote from an old movie that I like. But it's true. Oftentimes my friends and family get my leftovers, and it's not the best of me. They're getting the rest of me. And so think about putting your own mask on before you try to help those around you. Honor that, and then maintain it. Commit to regular future check-ins. Put them on your calendar. Mark for April 12th that you're going to spend 15 minutes thinking about how have you been doing with personal boundary setting? How well have you been honoring the 2 or 3 priority boundaries that you set way back on March 30th? As you build boundaries into habits, consider what to do next and just make it a part of your routine. So that's the structure that I want you to think about this exercise in around boundary setting. Now we'll get into some practical examples that I'll share with you. And as you hear these and you like them, or you think of ones that would be valuable to yourself, add them to your list. One way to add some personal boundaries that can be helpful is to limit commitments. Sorry, I think I skipped a slide. Maybe we'll go back here. Yeah, limit commitments. Okay, so let's talk about this one next. So what does it mean or look like to limit commitments? Well, to not allow yourself to be overextended. That's something a lot of us struggle with. We're in the habit of saying, yeah, sure, I can do that. Sure, I'll be glad to be on that committee, or yeah, I can pick them up from school. But be conscious of that. Be cognizant of it. When you think about things that you could do, use a calendar or a scheduling system if you don't already. Schedule anything that matters. If I don't put something on my calendar, it's not going to get done. So schedule anything that matters. Respect your calendar as a commitment that you've made to yourself and others. Consider prioritizing your to-do list. I carry a to-do list with me every day. It's over here on my desk. It's got a list of things, some of which I may never get to. Other things, I'll take my list and add something on there that I've already done just so I can have the satisfaction of crossing it off the list. But if you do a to-do list, think about this, something I've started doing recently. Instead of having one to-do list, I have 3. The first one is things I must do, things I have to do that are non-negotiable, they just have to be done. The second is things that I should do. boy, I really should get to this. The third thing is things that I could do, things that would be nice to do, things that if I have 2 minutes, I'd like to text my friend and see how her broken foot's doing, or I'd like to check on somebody else or send a note. That's great, but it's not something that may be required. So can you prioritize your to-do list in that way so that you don't stress over not getting the things done that you must do? Give yourself permission to say no. I mentioned earlier, try not to overcommit. Think about what your life or work commitments are right now. What could you get rid of? What could you set aside or transition to someone else? Don't forget to take your time off. Take time away. Take your vacation, your PTO time. So many of us don't take all the time that we're allotted. We don't take time for CME or conferences or anything like that because we know there's too much work to be done and we don't want to leave anybody else to do it. If you don't take your time away from work, you don't need to be a martyr. Trust me, no one will remember that you didn't take all your days off, except for you and your family, those closest to you. They'll remember if you don't do it. Take time to take care of yourself. Schedule personal time. Put it on your calendar. Schedule time to read, to write, to study, time to exercise, to draw, to paint, any other means of creativity that you'd like to express yourself. Schedule time to walk, time to veg out. Schedule time to spend with the people who mean the most to you. Schedule date nights or lunches or breakfasts. If you don't do it, if you're not intentional about it, it won't just happen organically. Trust me, I've tried it, and I know you have too. So look for opportunities to limit your commitments and avoid being overextended, and use a schedule. Some other ways to help think about and introduce personal boundaries into your life. Limit the number of decisions you have to make. Some of our stress, believe it or not, comes from decision making. How many decisions do you think you make throughout the course of a day? I'd never really thought of it before, but some researchers at Cornell University studied this. I don't know exactly how they measured it, but they came up with a study in 2007 that an adult makes about 35,000 remotely conscious decisions each day, 227 decisions each day, just based on food, what you're going to eat, how much of it you're going to eat, where you're going to eat it, who you're going to eat it with. Margin can be gained and resilience improved simply by decreasing the number of decisions that we make throughout the course of a day. So looking for opportunities to enact something I call a personal policy. What that is, it's a predetermined decision to guide action based on circumstances. So we do this all the time in a clinical sense. If this, then that. We walk through algorithms and flow diagrams in our heads. But what if we could have some predetermined decisions based on circumstances? Here are some examples of personal policies that I've heard about or that I've read about. I will get 8 hours of sleep each night. Non-negotiable. That's a policy. So I know if I've got to get up at 6 a.m., I need to be asleep by 10 p.m. So I need to go to bed at 9:30. I'm going to stick to my 1,800 calorie a day diet. I'm going to drink 80 ounces of water each day. Maybe I can't control anything else, but I might be able to control how many ounces of water I drink. I'm going to exercise for 90 minutes a week. It might be something as simple as I'm going to make sure that I get my physical done each year with my primary care physician. It might be I'm going to take a 30-minute break at noon each day. I'm going to eat lunch. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do something to get away from my desk, to get away from my computer screen, and actually give myself a little bit of a break. Those are some examples. Some of those might work for you. You might have other ideas. I hope that has spurred some thought for you. What could you do? There's one relative to technology that I heard about, is somebody saying, I will not look at my phone until I've eaten breakfast each morning. That's very tangible. It's realistic. And yet most of us, the first thing we do when we wake up is grab our phone to see what's happened overnight. What text did I miss? What email do I need to look forward to? What time is my first meeting or appointment? how you use your schedule. It might be, I will schedule work responsibilities only from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Some things you're not going to have control over, but most things you should be able to. And so think about how you might be able to set some personal policies in order to limit the number of decisions that you make. Here's a good one. Here's an example. So be decisive, even if you don't care, especially if there's no clear right or wrong answer. How many times has this happened to you? I guarantee it's going to happen to my family probably tonight. You get in the car to go somewhere, and the question comes up, where should we go to eat? Where do you want to go for dinner? And the answer is almost always the same, at least in my car. It's, oh, I don't care. The truth is, everybody cares. They might not care enough to really voice their opinion. But if you're presented with maybe two options, I'll give my kids two options. Hey, do you want to go to Applebee's or do you want to go to Longhorn Steakhouse? If you really don't care, it doesn't matter. Pick one. Just be decisive, and that decision can be made and moved on. Now you don't have to think about it anymore. I like the acronym OHIO. I'm a Buckeye from Cleveland, Ohio. Only handle it once. Anything you can do to be more efficient and only handle things once, whether it's a piece of paper, a lab result at the office, or it's a menial decision such as where do you want to go have a meal, only handle it once. Get it out of the way, then move on. You can save mental capacity by instituting some personal policies. These are boundaries. Keep them, honor them, make them firm, but not necessarily rigid. So one opportunity is to limit the number of decisions you got to make. Another one is to limit distractions. I'm so distractible, I can't do more than one thing at a time. People talk about multitasking. I believe that multitasking is a myth. Multitasking is just doing multiple things with variable rates of distraction, and it leads to less than optimal outcomes in many cases. I mentioned my kids a couple of times. So I got a new phone, a new iPhone. And I mentioned to one of my teenagers about my battery running slowly. And so she said, here, let me see your phone, Dad. So I gave it to her. And she looked at it, and she started going like this, making this motion with her hand. And you all probably know what I'm doing. I said, well, what are you doing? She said, I'm closing all these apps that you have open. No wonder your battery's dying quickly and your phone's running slow. And you know what? She was right. Most of us throughout the course of our day, we've got too many apps open at the same time. So our battery runs down quicker, and the processing center in our brain, the CPU, runs a lot more slowly and less efficiently than it could. So how can you get rid of some of those distractions? It could be closing apps on your phone. It could be turning off notifications on your phone. Before we got on this webinar, I set my phone to do not disturb mode. I did the same thing for my computer because I don't need to see a new email popping up in my lower right-hand screen. I don't need to see those notifications when I'm in clinic because it's a distraction from what I'm trying to do. Controlling our desktops of our computers so that we're not distracted, or we try to minimize the distractions, can be very valuable. We all know that being distracted when you're doing something important can have devastating consequences. We've seen the effects of distracted driving. Think about distracted doctoring and what adverse effects that might have for us and for our patients. What about distracted parenting or distracted spousing? When I'm trying to do too much and get to the point where I'm not doing any of it well, and that includes being a parent and being a husband, something has to change. I've got to get rid of some of the other distractions. To do anything well, to give it our best, it requires focused attention. And so these are some personal boundaries that you might think about instituting in your life. Another example, I have this bullet on the slide, come all the way home when you leave work. How can you leave work at work? Maybe turn off your phone. Maybe plug it in to be charged in a different room so that you're not looking at it unless you're on call. We have the ability to receive information from so many different sources in real time. Do you really need all of the news alerts that you get? Do I need to see it on my smartwatch as well? When I pull into my garage, I usually come home from the office, I pull in, park my car, and I take a slow, deep breath for a count of 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, hold it for 4. And in my mind or physically out loud, I'll say, with this breath, I come all the way home. And at that point, I try to do my best to leave work at work and focus on the relationships that I want to invest on at home. Intentionally limiting access to information, particularly when it comes to work, is critical. Don't be afraid to call a timeout when you need to refocus. And then I've got an example of what that looks like, something called boxed breathing. Any of you that might be into yoga, you've probably heard of this. But take a moment to put your own mask on first. I had a conversation with a physician colleague thinking about a book called The House of God. And many of you maybe have read it, but in that book it talks about which pulse should you check first in a code. And the answer is your own. Check your own. You got to make sure that you're equipped to help the person who needs your help. If you're not well equipped and able to meet their needs, you're not going to do them any good. So when you need to call a timeout during the course of a busy or stressed day, what can you do? You can put your own mask on before helping others. Boxed breathing. Inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4. Exhale for a count of 4, hold that for a count of 4. You can do 16 seconds per cycle. You can do 4 cycles in roughly a minute. What impact might this have when you're in the middle of a stressful situation? To just take a minute to do that. Well, the physiologic effects are it increases the SpO2 in your bloodstream. It slows your heart rate by vagal stimulation. It calms anxiety. It helps to increase energy. It improves focus and concentration, and that allows clearer thinking and decision making. So 1 minute can be an enormous benefit to you and the people around you. Don't be afraid to call a timeout. I hope you've thought about a list of personal boundaries in the last 15, 20 minutes that we've been going through those, and have started to make a list, and now can think about prioritizing which ones may have the most favorable impact. I'll end with a couple of things about resiliency in an organization. Resiliency doesn't just apply to individuals, it applies to organizations too. So as we all work in various healthcare organizations, it's worthwhile to take a moment to think about the resiliency of your organization and how you can affect it most favorably. What does a resilient organization look like? We value people and relationships and prioritize those things. And one of the biggest things is we make sure that when it's necessary, ideally before it becomes necessary, that caregivers who need it have access to mental health services, and that we make sure that we support that. We have opportunities, particularly as leaders within our practices and organizations, to set the tone and to lead by example. So look for opportunities to do this and live it out. So any activity that helps to connect to community or personal relationships and helps us to disconnect from work can help to establish a spirit of wellness and a culture of wellness. I listed some examples in this slide. I won't take the time to go through them, but anything that helps us disconnect from work and connect with community is going to be helpful in establishing and building a culture of wellness. I'll wrap up with this thought. Make a change. Do something different. You can't do all of these things at the same time, but you can choose to do something right now. What will you do to create margin and build resilience? You can either choose to be a victim, or you can choose to take control of your circumstances as best you can. You can develop and practice these skills by creating margin and building resilience now, and if you do that, they're going to serve you for the rest of their life. Choose to be a leader in this area and lead by example. You have the opportunity to favorably affect the culture of your team and your organization. Thinking about all the actions that you could possibly take to create margin and build resilience can be overwhelming, but don't be paralyzed by the possibilities. Rather, let yourself be motivated by them. This quote's often attributed to Albert Einstein. I don't know if it's accurately attributed or not, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Why should we allow ourselves to do that? Try something different. the series of phrases on your left, see one, do one, teach one, that's probably familiar from medical training. And it refers to the series of events with someone learning a new procedure. A similar series of challenges is on the right. Start one, share one, study one. I encourage you to pick 3 takeaway actions from our session today. Start one tomorrow, share one with a colleague, and study one for future implementation. Remember, we're all collectively standing on a burning platform. Don't let uncertainty and fear prevent you from taking the jump. Pick a landing spot, keep your eyes fixed on the target, and go for it, because there's too much at risk, and there's so much to gain. Don't forget to take care of yourself. Put your own mask on first, and take care of each other. I encourage you all to stay well. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take questions and comments in the time we've got remaining.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, Kevin. And so people have already figured out that if you've got questions, please enter them into the Q&A on the bottom. So we'll start off. What do you say to someone who struggles with boundaries because they feel pressure to take care of more than one thing in a patient visit, and it's hard for patients to get back in? That's something they hear a lot within their organization. They want to set boundaries, but the patient you're caring for in front of you needs something.
Yeah, so it really does come back to prioritization and letting go of the desire to do it all at once. We all desire to do that. I want to knock everything off the health maintenance at every visit and every opportunity, but I also recognize that I can't afford to pretend that each one of those things is equal in importance. It's a fatal flaw that we all have. And so what are maybe the 1 or 2 most important things? Address that, and for today, let that be enough.
Great. Another question that's been teed up is, do you have any suggestions for programs that can assist implementing this and as well as creating resilient organizations?
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools and resources available through the AMA, certainly through other organizations too, but we've done a lot about breaking down barriers to allow people that work in healthcare, physicians, other providers, to be able to deliver the type of care they want to in an environment that is safe and healthy for everybody. So there are tools and resources on the AMA website through the Steps Forward program. There's a website for Steps Forward that has toolkits available for all of these types of different challenges and questions relative to practice transformation and redesign, engaging the leaders in your organization, leading from the middle to bring them along as far as building resiliency and prioritizing caregiver wellness. So there are a lot of tools and resources. I think people just don't know where to look. The AMA website and specifically the Steps Forward toolkits is one that I would highly recommend. You're also welcome to reach out to any of us, members of the AMA Practice Transformation Team. We're here as a resource to help you, and not just you as an individual, but you and your practice and your patients by extension.
So one question that's been raised is if someone's experienced severe burnout, can they fully recover? And in that answer, if you could also talk a little bit about the relationship between physical health and mental health with your margin and your resilience that you had mentioned before. So to get out of severe burnout, where do you start first? Your physical or your mental or both? What do you think?
Yeah, so it's hard to separate those two, right? Because they're so interdependent. The physical health feeds into the mental well-being. The mental health feeds into the physical well-being. So trying to put your finger on the one thing that if you work on it will improve everything else is extremely valuable. It's also very elusive. So I encourage myself and other people to just start with something. I don't care what it is that you do. If you're feeling physically fatigued, exhausted, run down, maybe making sure that you're getting adequate rest is priority number 1. I tell that to patients all the time, right? Think of what we tell patients. Take care of yourself first. If you're expended completely, you've got nothing left to care for the people that are dependent upon you. And the same is true for us. So how might I feel better or different if I got 8 solid hours of sleep every single night for 2 weeks? I guarantee you that's going to improve my mental health outlook, and it's going to improve my physical health and how I feel. If I exercise, I know I'm going to feel better if I do it. I don't want to do it, but I know I'm going to feel better. Things like that, where once you've done them, you've never once said, boy, I wish I hadn't done that. Think about those types of things, because that's going to be significantly impactful for both your physical and your mental health.
And
to answer the question more specifically, yeah, you can fully recover from burnout. It's just the further down you are along that spectrum, the harder it is and the longer it takes. And so trying to not get there in the first place by building our margin and resilience is important. But this is something that you can't do alone. It takes working with other people, mental and physical health professionals. And that's why one of my points about a resilient organization was organizations that prioritize and make available and accessible those types of services to caregivers who need them. It's vitally important.
So the resources that you had mentioned that the AMA has created for larger organizations, do you know if they can be used for subspecialty organizations, physician organizations, or are they just for those that deliver healthcare?
Yeah, they are useful across even industries, I would say, outside of healthcare. But they are healthcare specific, but they're usable across specialties, across sizes of different organizations. And you don't have to be an AMA member to access them. They're free. They're available online to everyone. So I encourage everybody to take a look, because I know you're going to find something that you'll want to know more about through the AMA resources.
And then what I'm going to wrap up with is kind of the key question. You're the low man on the totem pole. You see the problems. How do you get things started to try and get this resilience and burnout recognition and started in your organization?
Yeah, so a couple ways. One is choose to make it a priority. Two is lead by example. You don't have to have a title in order to be a leader. And so you can be the low man on the totem pole, but you can lead by example. I have a quote that I've used for years: nothing shares like a bad mood. I think the opposite is also true. When you're a really positive person, that shares, and it's positive. So I determined a long time ago that when I come into the office in the morning, my team always asks me how I'm doing. I'm going to respond with, I'm great. I'm really glad to be here today. We've got a great opportunity to take care of patients and do the best work that we possibly can. There are times where I'm faking it until I can make it, for sure. But by and large, when I say those types of things out loud, it makes me feel better. It makes me feel more engaged, and it does something for my staff too. And they are more engaged. They're more positive. If I start talking negatively about circumstances, situations, or even worse yet, a particular patient, that feeds over to my staff too, and it becomes a situation that can degrade very rapidly and be very negative.
Very good. Yes, a smile goes a long way compared to a frown. And so, Kevin, this was fantastic. What I'd like to do is remind people that have asked the questions about resources that we do have those available through the AMA's website. And we also want to highlight that we do have additional webinars coming up. The next one is April 19th at 12 o'clock noon Central Time, Fostering Clinician Wellbeing, Current Trends and Insights. So be sure to check those resources. And then lastly, people have asked, is there some way that by participating in these Steps Forward modules and webinar series, we can get some achievement recognized? And yes, indeed, we are now have a recognition of participation certificate that includes viewing webinars, attending the boot camps, listening to podcasts, doing telementoring sessions, reading the toolkits, just 3 or more. The website, steps-webinars at the AMA's main website is how you can get additional information for that. And again, we would like to thank everyone on this webinar today. Kevin, you've done a wonderful job. Hopefully people will take to heart that you are the first step to preventing burnout through your resilience, and then the second step is fix your organization.